Live from London, this is BBC News. Ukraine's President Zelensky says he won't betray his country's national interests, but will work with the US and offer an alternative to the peace plan put forward by the White House.
As a president of Ukraine, I'm obliged to defend the sovereignty and independence of Ukraine.
We will get more on that. We'll also speak to the prominent Putin critic Sir Bill Browder live on today's programme. Our other headlines: the UK politician jailed for taking bribes as part of a pro-Russian influence campaign. Reform UK's former leader in Wales is sentenced to 10.5 years in prison. The largest prostate cancer screening trial in 2 decades begins in the UK, aimed at improving detection of the disease. And a quite extraordinary opening day of the Ashes series in Australia. 19 wickets fall. We'll get more reaction to that mesmerising day of cricket. Hello and welcome to Verified Live. Ukraine's President Zelensky has addressed the Ukrainian people, saying he will not betray his country's national interest. He was careful not to publicly criticise the peace deal drawn up by the United States, saying he will work quickly and constructively with the US, but added he will propose an alternative to the White House plan. Earlier, he held a call with the Vice President JD Vance. He has also had calls with various European leaders through the course of today. Well, the draft plan emerged after meetings between the US and Russia and appears to reflect many of Moscow's key demands. Let's hear some of what President Zelensky has been saying.
Ukrainians, every nation has a moment in its life when there is a need to talk, honestly, calmly, without any assumptions, gossips, without anything irrelevant. As it is, as I always try to speak to you, there is one of the most difficult moments in our history. The pressure on Ukraine now is one of the biggest. Now Ukraine may face a very difficult choice, either to lose its dignity or its key partner. Either difficult 28 points or an extremely difficult winter, the most difficult, and the further risks. Life without freedom, dignity, and without justice, and forced to trust someone who attacked us twice. They will be waiting for an answer from us, although I have already given it on the 20th of May of the 2019, when I gave oath to Ukraine. I said, I, Volodymyr Zelensky, chosen by the will of Ukrainian people as a president of Ukraine, am obliged to defend the sovereignty and independence of Ukraine.
Well, let's speak to BBC Monitoring's Russia editor Vitaly Shevchenko. And Vitaly, it was really interesting the way President Zelensky laid it out. No direct criticism, but clear he's going to come up with alternative proposals alongside the Europeans. Tell me more about what he said, because it was crucial, that line, he won't betray Ukraine and the national interests, but was quite clear that he knew that there would be a lot of political pressure coming in the next few days.
What he said reflects the impossible position that he is in. On the one hand, he suggested that accepting this 28-point plan presented by the Americans would amount to Ukraine, and I quote, losing its dignity. And on the other hand, he said the alternatives are no less unappealing, including losing America as Ukraine's key ally, key partner, than facing Russia's continued onslaught through a winter that Zelensky described as the most difficult yet. So, okay, he vowed to work round the clock to make sure that whatever peace plans are approved, they include provisions for what he called Ukraine's dignity, independence, and freedom. But how exactly he's going to achieve that is less clear, frankly, given Russia's continued military attacks and Americans' really heavy pressure that is being piled on the Ukrainian leader. For that, to cope with all that, Zelensky needs support from Europeans. And frankly, Matthew, that gives me a sense of déjà vu. This is Well, more or less what we saw back in August after that summit between Donald Trump and Vladimir Zelensky, when Europeans rushed to Vladimir Zelensky's aid, assistance. So he had several phone calls today. He had a joint conference with the leaders of France, Britain, and Germany. So, looking at what he said, I get a sense of urgency. He looked
Yes.
shaken, I thought.
In terms of that 28-point plan, which are the bits that give Kyiv the most alarm?
The most alarming bit is, of course, withdrawing from parts of Ukraine that Russia doesn't control yet, cutting the size of the Ukrainian armed forces, pledging not to join foreign military alliances such as NATO. That, of course, doesn't seem fair to Ukrainians who have been defending their country. And also, what about people living in those places that the Americans apparently want Ukraine to vacate? And also, withdrawing from Donbass would mean abandoning control of the so-called fortress belt in eastern Ukraine, which has been stopping Russia from advancing further west. So that would leave Ukraine exposed to further Russian attacks.
Vitaly, thanks very much. Well, Vitaly, referring to those European calls, let's turn to some of the European reaction we've already had, because here's Lithuania's president speaking just a short while ago.
We are talking about a possible or potential reduction of Ukrainian armed forces, territorial concessions, and some other decisions which would, of course, mean actual capitulation of Ukraine. And we should use this momentum to express very strong will and strong opinion of European, first of all, European community, that we should find the formula which preserves Ukrainian territorial integrity.
Well, the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer held a call with President Zelensky, as Vitaly was telling us, along with Chancellor Merz of Germany and President Macron of France, and said Ukraine must determine its own future. They're working on counter-proposals to that US plan, according to the Reuters news agency.
Well, I've just had a call with President Zelensky alongside President Macron and Chancellor Merz, and that was an opportunity for us to express again our support for Ukraine and the principle that's very important, which is all matters to do with Ukraine must be determined ultimately by Ukraine. Now, we all want a just and lasting peace. That's what the President of America wants. That's what we all want. And so we need to work from where we are to that end. But the principle that Ukraine must determine its future under its sovereignty is a fundamental principle.
And how did you feel when you read the proposals? What was your feeling about it?
Well, it reinforced in me that basic principle that we have to work from where we are to the just and lasting peace. I know that's what President Trump wants, and he's been working to that end. But we must reiterate the principle that matters about Ukraine must be determined by Ukraine.
Well, let's talk now to the financier Sir Bill Browder, who was expelled from Russia in 2005 for exposing corruption in state-owned companies. Bill, welcome here to the programme. You posted, and let me just read out what you posted on social media earlier. You called this peace plan worse than the Trump-Vance White House ambush right at the start of this administration of President Zelensky. So tell me why you came to that conclusion.
Well, first and foremost, this is not a peace plan that was negotiated with Ukraine. This is a peace plan that, for all intents and purposes, was drafted in the Kremlin and somehow found its way onto White House letterhead. The proposals that are being made are indecent proposals. As you've just described on your show, it's asking for Ukraine to give up territory that Russia couldn't gain through many years of military attacks, now being asked to just hand it over. Ukraine's being asked to reduce the size of its military, and on and on and on. This is a non-starter. It's not going to happen. But to put Ukraine in this position to say no, it's basically setting Ukraine up for essentially a falling out with the Trump administration. And And there's a lot of consequences of that. Primarily, the U.S. still supplies weapons via Europe. Europe pays for them. The U.S. supplies them for Ukraine. And furthermore, there is intelligence sharing, which is very valuable. And so Ukraine, of course, will not agree to this proposal. But then the question is, what does the U.S. do when they don't?
Yes, and President Zelensky talking about anticipating immense pressure in the coming days. Reuters, with that scoop a little earlier in the day, suggesting the U.S. has told them that they have to sign up by Thursday, next Thursday, or face arms being cut off and intelligence being cut off. And that would be a really serious consequence if that were to happen. Now, there was that meeting 6 weeks ago in the White House, the last Trump-Zelensky meeting. And of course, the Financial Times talked about behind the scenes what actually happened. And we've got a picture of Zelensky head in hands across the table. And it was reported that Donald Trump used expletives. He threw maps off the table during that meeting. So it went pretty disastrously only 6 weeks ago. But officials in Kyiv afterwards said the problem was that the White House and their policy was going round in circles. And do you get the sense that that is exactly where we are 6 weeks on with a reversioning of the same Moscow talking points?
And that's exactly where we may be next Thursday. You have to understand that Trump basically makes decisions based on the last person he's talked to. And so this is a JD Vance, Witkoff proposal that has, there's many other people on the other side of this argument in Washington. I'm sure they'll be going to Trump in the next few days. There are Trump's allies, all those people who showed up, all these heads of state who showed up after the Alaska summit on a day's notice to convince him otherwise. And so I don't think that this is like the last step in a negotiation. What I do think is that the Russians have gotten the upper hand at this moment in time. But there's one day when Trump stands in front of the United Nations saying that Ukraine shouldn't give up any territory, and then he changes his mind, and he could easily change his mind again. The one thing I can say for sure is that Ukraine is not going to surrender, which is what this document asks them to do. And so then the question is, what are the supposed consequences for not signing up to this agreement? And there's going to be a lot of water under the bridge and a lot of people getting involved between now and next Thursday.
As you say, we've been here before. There's déjà vu for certainly European leaders, but Lithuania's former foreign minister posted on social media that Europe had effectively wasted time waiting for Donald Trump to get on board and need to get on with making their own decisions. Do you think, do you share that view that actually it's for Europe to actually get on and make some of the bigger decisions? The Taurus missiles, the long-range missiles from Germany that Ukraine has wanted for such a long while, a decision on that, or using frozen Russian assets that for months now you have been advocating that the Europeans should actually use to actually spend that money on some of these things?
Well, oftentimes Europe only acts when there's a crisis. This looks like it's heading towards a crisis, so this might actually be good news in the end. The most important thing for everyone to understand is that the U.S., since Donald Trump became president in the second term, has stopped supplying military aid to Ukraine. There's no more money coming from the U.S. for Ukraine, and so all the money comes from Europe. And to the extent that the U.S. has stopped supplying the money, there's a whole lot of money sitting in Europe that belongs to the Russian government that could be confiscated and should be confiscated, and I think will be confiscated. And furthermore, the Ukrainians have figured out how to make their own arms. If they need to, they can start sending their own missiles in, and they have been. And so, we all said Ukraine is going to lose the war in 3 days to Russia when it first started, and of course that didn't happen. And so I wouldn't overstate the drama of what has happened here. I think that Trump is playing a hand which he has weakened himself by if he was continuing to supply military aid to Ukraine and then he said we'll stop supplying it, that's a lot more damaging than having stopped supplying it and then still demanding this unreasonable concession.
Bill Browder, we have to leave it there, but fascinating as always to talk to you and have you on the program. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Let me take you to the live page because that story is moving all the time. We're still waiting for more American reaction, but there is the live page with the latest details. As I say, our teams in various capitals are updating the details, so head to the BBC live page for the very latest on that story. Around the world and across the UK, you are watching BBC News. Welcome back to BBC News. Let's turn to the sentencing now of a UK politician for taking bribes as part of a pro-Russian influence campaign. Reform UK's former leader in Wales, Nathan Gill, has been jailed for 10.5 years. He admitted taking bribes to make statements in favour of Russia while being a member of the European Parliament. He pleaded guilty to 8 counts of bribery between December 2018 and July 2019. Well, our political correspondent Joe Pike sent this update from outside of the court.
It's a very significant sentence for a very significant crime that the judge said was sophisticated and took place over a prolonged period. There was almost no reaction from Nathan Gill as that 10.5-year sentence was handed down. Mrs. Justice Chima Grubb said he abused a position of significant authority and trust and was motivated by financial and political gain. She also said you allowed money to corrupt your moral compass, and that constitutes a betrayal of the public. The judge also talked about the wider damage that this offending has caused.
The harm inflicted is indeed profound. Your conduct fundamentally compromised the integrity of a supranational legislative body, particularly in its dealings with Russia, a persistently hostile state, during a period of an association agreement between the EU and Ukraine reached in 2017. The revelation of your actions has a broad and deleterious effect on public confidence and trust in democratic institutions of importance to many dozens of millions of people.
Nathan Gill sat impassive in the dock throughout today's hearing, only nodding when his barrister, the defence barrister, referenced the impact of his crimes on Nathan Gill's family. He has a wife and 7 children, and his barrister talked about the stigma, the effect on them, including the financial and emotional strain at a formative time in their young lives. We should make clear, Mr. Gill was in the Welsh Senate, he was in the European Parliament, he was, towards the final years of British representation in Brussels and Strasbourg, a key ally of Nigel Farage. The two were close, but Nigel Farage has said he was stunned by the revelations in previous weeks as to Mr. Gill's crimes. He had no knowledge of what he called shameful activities. And also, as you said, Nina, the Met Police have confirmed to us they found absolutely no evidence of links between the crimes, bribery of Mr. Nathan Gill, which have led to that 10.5-year sentence, and the current Reform leader, Nigel Farage.
Well, that was Joe Pike speaking earlier about the sentencing. Let's get background from Wirra Davis.
As he climbed the ranks of UKIP and then the Brexit Party, Nathan Gill was often seen alongside a man he described as his political hero, Nigel Farage.
An honest, decent, honourable man who's been loyal to me in the party at all times.
But as a member of the European Parliament, Gill wasn't just making speeches about the UK's imminent departure.
Declaration of Human Rights.
He'd also been approached by lobbyists to talk about Ukraine and pro-Russian interests, including 2 TV stations in the country.
The TV channels 112 and News One in 2018, 2019, they were not legitimate media organizations. They were propaganda channels of Russia, the country that was waging a war against Ukraine.
It's one of serious challenges to democracy.
Speaking about the worsening situation in Ukraine in itself wasn't a crime. Indeed, Nigel Farage had warned about the dangers of poking the Russian bear. The difference with Gil is that he was being paid, bribed thousands of pounds to shill in favour of Moscow. This man, Oleg Voloshin, was contacting Gil by text, using coded words like Christmas gifts or postcards, cash to make speeches. The former opposition Ukrainian MP also sent scripts, which Gil sometimes delivered almost verbatim at the EU Parliament.
It is wrong to fight repression with repression.
For which he was paid in hard currency.
Like being violently attacked by radicals with little, if any, reaction or protection from the Ukrainian government.
Things stepped up a gear when Gil organised an event in Strasbourg on behalf of Viktor Medvedchuk, a pro-Moscow business tycoon. With Gil's help, he pushed his plan for peace in the Donbass on the EU stage. Again, Gil was paid. The next day, Medvedchuk met his friend Vladimir Putin in St. Petersburg, who lavished praise on the plan. Regional watchers say it's all part of a Russian plot to disrupt.
I think the ultimate objective was to promote Russian interests, which was to stop Kiev from looking westwards.
But when the FBI found incriminating evidence on Oleg Voloshin's phone, Gil's luck ran out. He was stopped at Manchester Airport on his way to Moscow, and at his Anglesey home, police found large bundles of cash. When ultimately arrested, he had little to say.
Who is Oleg Voloshin?
No comment.
Nathan Gill may have been a relatively small cog in a bigger Russian operation, but anti-terror police say his actions were a threat to national security.
These are the types of things that we're seeing Russia commit across Europe, and it's why our international relations, particularly in counter-terrorism policing, are so important to how we can confront Russia and make sure we disrupt their activity.
Russia's subsequent invasion of Ukraine has further destabilised Europe, a long way from semi-rural Anglesey, where Nathan Gill, a father of 7 and a bishop in the Mormon church, hid his dark secret. Former colleagues now distance themselves from the man who briefly became Reform's leader in Wales. His sentence, say police, a strong message to others still being investigated that they will be held to account. Laura Davis, BBC News.
Now, an earthquake with a magnitude of 5.5 has jolted the Bangladeshi capital, Dhaka, and its surrounding areas as well, killing at least 6 people.